This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello and welcome to Daughterhood, the podcast. I am your host, Roseanne Corcoran, Daughterhood Circle Leader and Primary Caregiver. Daughterhood is the creation of Ann Tumlinson, who has worked on the front lines in the healthcare field for many years and has seen the multitude of challenges caregivers face. Our mission is to support and build confidence in women who are managing their parents' care. Daughterhood is what happens when we put our lives on hold to take care of our parents. We recognize this care is too much for one person to handle alone. We want to help you see your efforts are not only good enough, they are actually heroic. Our podcast goal is to bring you some insight into navigating the healthcare system, provide resources for you as a caregiver, as well as for you as a person, and help you know that you don't have to endure this on your own. Join me in Daughterhood. Courtney Hogenson is a registered nurse, entrepreneur, and innovator with over a decade of experience in the healthcare industry. As a certified care manager and a legal nurse consultant, Courtney has extensive expertise in elder care and patient advocacy and has served as a primary liaison and medical advisor for patients and families. She has been an active member and leader of various professional and community organizations, such as the Aging Life Care Association, the Alzheimer's Association, and Texas Nurses Association. Courtney is the founder and chief caregiver of Call Light, an on-demand healthcare platform that connects care seekers with trusted nurses and clinicians for in-home healthcare anytime, anywhere. Today, Courtney shares ways caregivers can provide care in the home, the importance of creating a care team, and strategies and pitfalls along the way. I hope you enjoy our conversation. More and more, we hear people say they want to age in place or be cared for at home when that time comes because of the cost of living in an assisted living community or not wanting to live in a nursing home, or they just don't want to leave their home. Yet it's not always as easy as it sounds to provide care at home. Courtney, where do we start when it comes to caring for someone at home?
I would say in a perfect world, you start before you need it, because most cases I find that they're an emergency situation. They're a last minute thing. It's something that, look, as much as none of us we don't want to manifest that we're going to need the care and all the things, but it's in reality, if we are lucky enough to live long enough, we're all going to need care. We're all going to be part of a care team. All of us are going to be in that. So I found that if you can plan for that in advance before you need it, you have so many more options. So I think really just having those conversations with your loved ones, as much as nobody wants to talk about getting older and what happens. And it's so key to have those conversations so that the family members that are making the decisions on the behalf of someone else do it with confidence and do it knowing, oh, this is exactly what mom told me she wanted to do if she couldn't speak for herself or what have you. So I think you have to start with where you are and plan proactively, prepare for the worst, plan for the best, but just know that you're not always going to get everything you want. There's definitely an element of compromise. I've got some patients who are better off at home, and it makes sense because of all the things that work for them. But for other people, home is no longer the best place. Like I had a really, really amazing CEO. He had early onset Alzheimer's, and everyone thought, oh, he needs to stay in his home. He needs to stay in his home. To a point, he stayed into his home until it became unsafe. Because his home was like a mansion, in Bel Air, and it was like a museum. And it got to the point where like he fell and hit his head, and paramedics come, and everyone's like, oh, what year is it? What president is it? And we're like, he doesn't know those answers anymore. So
Right.
you're not going to get the right answer. But it
Right.
came to a point where he was no longer safe at home. It wasn't safe. And so he's actually spent the last 5 or so years at this really amazing assisted living where he gets to see people every day. And it's almost like he gets to be that CEO every day again, down in the dining room. He's waving to his people. And, it's just, and you have to kind of be able to roll with what happens, because some people, a situation's just not right for them. And then other people, they're very pleasantly surprised. They end up at a boarding care home, a nice small home, and they say, this is great. They do everything for me. And other people are like happy to be in an assisted living because laundry's taken care of, housekeeping's taken care of, meals. It just depends. And everyone's a little different.
Yeah. And I also think if, I've talked to many people about how do you talk to your parents and how do you bring this up? Sometimes if you have that thought in your head, if this happens, like
Yeah.
if it's a brick wall and you can't break through those conversations, or you've had those conversations to no avail, but even if you just have it in your own mind of, okay, if this happens, how would I set this up? How could we make this work? So you could even be in process in your own mind.
Yeah.
If you don't have the buy-in, because it's hard and you need to build that team.
Yeah.
You have to have it in your mind of, how am I going to build this team? And what advice do you have for trying to build a team?
I would say, build your team sooner than later, and have in your mind, one of the most important team members is your primary care doctor. Whoever that person is really needs to be on the same page with you, understand what your wishes are, what you would or wouldn't want done in the event of a heart attack, or you stop breathing or whatever. So that person I find to be the most important, who your primary care person is. And then next to that, I feel very strongly, and I'm a little biased, you need a patient advocate. And you need it to be somebody who's not a family member, not in your will, and, someone who has the ethical, an unbiased medical professional who can kind of cut through all the red tape, all the things, because as you know, our healthcare system is very fragmented, very siloed, very, very hard to navigate. And so you really need someone who speaks that language, because it's like going into a courtroom without an attorney. You don't know what you don't know. You don't even know what to ask. You don't know the rules. It's like so if you can afford it, I would say hire a patient advocate before you need one. Even if it's someone who's checking in with you once a year, every quarter. Hey, everything's stable. Got you in my files. I know all your meds. I know all your doctors. I know what your wishes are, who you want on your team. I know the plan in advance. And so if and when you need me, I'm here, rather than shit hit the fan.
Right.
I need you. Because then you just don't have a lot of options, and you're kind of scrambling. If you've never had those conversations,
Yeah.
you don't even know what you don't know again.
No. And especially when you're under pressure and under stress, trying to make the best decision.
Yeah.
When everything, like you said, is fragmented and you don't even know where to start.
And if you're dealing with families, which you usually are, there's so much baggage that comes with a lifetime of relationships and things. And it's like, people would often say to me, I don't know how you do it, Courtney. What you're doing is just like phenomenal. And I said, well, you got to remember, this isn't my family. If this was my mom or dad, I'd probably be just as big of a mess, maybe more, but since I'm able to come in with, open mind, and I come in knowing I've been probably down this road before with another patient. I've seen something like this before. I know how it could or couldn't go off the rails. And it's like, it's so much easier to not be the daughter and not be the son, not be the spouse when you're going through something like this with a loved one.
Right. But, unfortunately, in reality, that is what happens.
Yeah. So I think in reality, you choose the best person you can. You make sure that person's up for the challenge, because you certainly don't want to put that on someone who's not capable of it. Or because sometimes, I'll tell you from my family and from experience, my dad's dad had Alzheimer's, and he moved into my parents' home when I was in high school. And it's interesting how all the years up until then, we thought, well, my Aunt Sally is the closest with Paul. She's going to take care of him. He's going to go with her. And it's just so weird how we assume it's going to be someone, often the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, it ended up being my mom and dad. I mean, Aunt Sally was participating and she was involved, but it's amazing how people just assume it's going to be the daughter. And I can't imagine what that would have done to her life and all the things. I mean, my parents, they struggled to take care of Paul, and he was in adult daycare and all the things. But I just got real insight into like, it's a family system, and some people play different roles, and you might be surprised at some of the roles people do and don't play. And you just got to realize you could be resentful about uncle, whoever didn't step in, but it's like, you just never know what's going on in their lives. And some people are not good fits for those types of roles. You just never know.
It's true. And it's so hard to try to manage all of that, either within your family or when you do bring somebody in from the outside. It's hard to manage because it's hard to get all of that out. Like what's your motivation? What's my motivation? What's the end goal? How do we want to shape this?
Yeah.
But that's all part of this. And that's what makes it so difficult. And the fact that you have daughters mostly and some sons. We're not excluding sons,
Mm-hmm.
but you have caregivers who are trying to provide this care by themselves.
Yeah.
When in reality, it would take 4 to 6 people would have to be on your staff on the daily.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do this. And then that's why it's so hard. That's why we're so exhausted. That's why we're so stressed. And it's just so hard to actually sit there and think about, I'm doing the work of 4 to 6 people. No wonder I'm tired.
Oh, yeah. And those people are usually experts in something. They've got different expertise, and it's like someone's really good at this. So you're kind of thrown in as a family member. You're a novice because you've never dealt with it, more than likely. And it's like it's like hitting someone with a fire hose. Like, hey, you got this?
Yeah. You good? You're holding
Yeah,
that egg in the
this,
spoon,
right?
and we're gonna turn the fire hose on you. So keep the spoon on the egg, okay?
Yeah. And
horrible.
I think you have to realize that your care teams evolve over time too. Some people might be really good at the beginning. Some people might be better at the end. You just have to realize that it's going to take a village, and you don't want this one hero, because that is just, you're prime for exhaustion, resentment, all the things. Someone's going to fail. Yeah. Like the caregiver is going to die sooner than the patient if it's just one person and they're doing everything. So I think it's just all the other family members and care members need to recognize that just because someone lives closest or whatever doesn't mean they're going to do everything. It's just, okay, you live in Hawaii. What can you do from there? What are your skills? What are your gifts? What are your talents? What is your capacity? What can you do? And I think I found that when I come in as a professional, even if the families, they're usually a little bit dysfunctional. I think I've heard someone say, like, any family with more than one member has some dysfunction in it. Totally true. So I find that you come together, and like you were saying, this person's motives might be this person's that, whatever. If you come together, I found that I would like to get together. Let's say it's 4 siblings and maybe half of them get along or like each other or what have you. I always try to get together with each of them a little bit before and say, hey, what are your goals? What are your concerns? Let's talk about that. Put it in writing. And then you and me, let's talk one-on-one. I do that with like all 4 of them. And then we all get together with mom or whoever else is part of the care team, come together with an agenda. And I'm in charge, because I'm not a family member, and they're all going to kind of listen to me a little bit more and not fight with each other. So I just say, hey, we're all here for the same goal. We're all here because we care about this person or this couple or whatever. And you may not agree with what she says or he says or what I say or what they want, but we're all here for this one person. And if we can all agree on that and recognize that we all want what's best for them, then we're starting from a good place. We're not always going to agree, but let's agree that this is why we're all here and just start from there.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And because I think it's true, because you're all working for the same goal. So let's figure out how to be on that team working for the same goal. And it would just be easier in the long run. But it's hard because everybody will have different needs and need different levels of care.
Yeah.
So how do you figure that out from that starting point?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you bring up so many things. My mind's just like, oh yeah. And then there's this situation where you get, that and this.
Yeah, take your time.
So I think you have to really meet the person where they are. I've had patients where they say, oh, this guy was this type of person and that, and then, and I'm like, I get that, but that was 20 years ago. That was before this thing. You have to meet them where they are. They are not living the same life. They don't have the same needs as they did back then. And so I think you really just have to recognize where that person is, where they're safest, what their budget is, who they have on their team, what makes sense. Because if the budget is limited, you don't want to blow it all right away, and most people do have a limited budget. So it's like you want to be mindful of you and I know this, care is very expensive.
Yes.
It's one of those, that's why a lot of daughters do it. And that's why a lot of women do it, because it's sort of that second shift that goes unpaid and unnoticed. And but when you get down to it and you get to pay for it, you realize how expensive it is.
Yes.
And it is. So it's like you really have to, you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to hire nurses, a team of nurses if you don't need it. If you just need a caregiver, if you have a good $1 billion, maybe you do, but most of us don't.
No.
You start with what you need and then you work your way up. And I think it's good to have a patient advocate or a nurse or some type of medical professional who can say, okay, you're dealing with diabetes now, injections, you're dealing with blood sugars. Okay, this is something that someone else should maybe be managing. When it comes to medications, filling up that pill box once a week or every other week, like maybe that should be a nurse. If there's a lot of meds going on here, I know from my husband, I was watching him try to get just like a mail order pharmacy. And it was like a full-time job being on the phone with this company. And I'm like, thank goodness he's not going to die from not having this medication. But this is crazy. So you need to have someone kind of managing if they're really important medications. You need to have someone managing that these are never going to run out. If you're traveling, all those things.
Yeah.
So I think just having different levels of care and access to that, that's what I find by having an advocate that's a nurse or somebody like that. They usually have a village as well. Like I know a fiduciary, I know an estate planning attorney, I know, we know the home care agency, we know the geriatric care manager, we know all these people. And so if and when you need them, we just pull them in.
Well, and that's the best case scenario of everything. But much like care, there is no, you have to pay out of pocket for all of that.
Yeah.
And we know Medicare doesn't pay for long-term care. They don't pay for companion care. They don't pay for any of that, which is a surprise to some people, which, because everybody thinks, well, Medicare will pay for it. And it's like, Medicare will not pay for this.
I remember learning that, my grandfather who had Alzheimer's, it's like, oh, well, we'll pay for all these other things, kidney failure and whatever. Alzheimer's? Nope, not that one. Sorry.
No.
Not that box. You're on your own.
You're on your own. And then it's like, okay, well, thank you.
And it's unsustainable because at this point, there are so many more people that are living so much longer and that are having these chronic conditions. And it's like, we're going to break our healthcare system if we don't change it.
Totally. And I think because people, again, don't realize it until they're in it. And because they hadn't been in the hospital for a long time, or whoever, when their grandparents were cared for, it was different. It was a different time. And now to actually have to get a pre-certification for the medication that you've been taking because of this chronic illness, like, was it cured? It wasn't cured. It's a chronic illness. Like, they've been taking this medication for the last 10 years and now we have to go through these hoops again. It doesn't make any sense. And all of that adds to the time and the energy that a caregiver has to spend.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's not recognized. And in the meantime, this is part of your daily life.
I think for people that don't know, like this kind of stuff. And I think that's why you and I are probably like, why are more people not outraged? Why are more people not trying to help people? And it's like,
right.
I remember being at UCLA in the ICU, which was a fantastic hospital. Like if I needed to go to a hospital, I'd go there. Great nurses, great doctors. But I remember thinking like, okay, well, when they leave the ICU and they go home, if they're requiring home health or hospice, like they're going to have a team of people. Like there's going to be some coordination of care, some continuity. Like, especially if someone just got a heart transplant, like surely there's going to be, some No. Like, I remember being shocked, like, wait a minute, you're just on your own, aren't you? And it was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe that people were on their own who had no idea how to navigate these systems. And I just thought, wow, we're really in trouble.
Yeah, it's horrifying. Not only navigate the systems, but provide that type of care. I mean, you go home with the piece of paper and the phone number to call. Okay, if you have any trouble, call this number. Okay, I hope somebody's answering. I hope it's not after 7 o'clock at night. I hope it's, productive. And as the caregiver, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And it's just, and that's the thing. And, then they're talking about hospital at home, which kind of makes me very nervous. I understand the concept,
Yeah.
but it makes me very nervous
Yeah.
because how are you carrying out that care as a caregiver?
Yeah.
How are you supposed to, what can you do to carry out this care?
With support. I mean, you have to have a team and you have to have a coordination of care. You can't just rely on the caregiver to do these things. I mean, I know when patients are getting out of the hospital from, maybe like an acute event like a stroke or heart attack, they're going to do a lot better if they have a nurse going home with them or a team of nurses who are going to oversee the first 48 or 72 hours of care. They're going to make sure those prescriptions got picked up, they got filled, they got taken, that the person took them as they were supposed to. If there's any side effects, they're going to report that immediately. So it's almost like you need someone there. And I feel like insurance companies are eventually going to get hip with it. Like, oh yeah, we're going to reduce readmissions if we have a nurse going home with a patient and making sure they show up for their first post-op appointment and all the things are triaged right there at home. It's like they're starting to get it, but right now it's like we're just building these teams on our own and not everyone has access to those type of things.
No. And when you don't, how do you suggest the caregivers try to be that person and care and provide that care without anybody? What kind of options are there for them?
You mean for like care at home and things like that?
Yeah.
I mean,
like actually, yeah.
I would say if you're starting from scratch, you've never done anything like that. I think you just have to, it's all so personal. Everything's so different. And someone may have had the best caregiver or best agency or whatever in the past. But if that person's not available or that team of people, it's like, proximity comes into so many factors come in. So I find that if you can find a support group, some sort of whatever it is, other people that are going through what you're doing, hopefully that are a little bit further down the road that can kind of tell you what's coming and what they did, what they tried, what did work, what didn't work, what they would do differently if they knew what they knew now, like it's so great to have these different people because there is no one right path or one right answer. Like sometimes you have to try it and then that doesn't work, try something else. And you just have to, there is no straight path to like, this is how you should do this. It's like,
Right.
This is working right now. So we're going to do this. We're going to continue this. If and when this doesn't work, so I think it's just really opening yourself up to what do I need? What's coming? What's up ahead? How can I plan for that? Just having an idea, almost like having a roadmap or an atlas, like, okay, we're not going to know exactly where we're going, but it's probably going to go in one of these directions. And we need to be prepared if and when it goes this way or that way, or, off the rails, what are we going to do? And asking for help. I think you just really have to ask for help. I think the stoicism for daughters and for caregivers and for families is it's ridiculous. Like we can't do this alone. We can't. And we need to ask for help and we need to volunteer help. We're all in this together. And I just feel like eventually people are going to recognize, I think it just happens where like you get thrown into it, like you were saying, and then you're just trying to keep your head above water and you're just trying to keep one foot in front of the other. And then you're like, oh yeah, another day I'll change the system. I'll break this and help.
Right. And you keep going at that pace. And then you think, wait, well, now if I stop and I have to explain it to somebody, I can't explain this to somebody. And that's the other part that you get caught in because you're barely keeping it together as it is. And then to say, oh, wait, you're going to come in and help me. That's great. Oh, wait, now I have to tell you everything that I do.
Yeah.
And what my person likes or doesn't like,
I've found,
you know,
I think something that can really help mitigate that is having a care plan. that evolves with the person. And I always had sort of like an emergency care binder for each of my patients, loved ones, or whatever. And it would have the basic stuff, like if a paramedic showed up, didn't know anything, and the patient couldn't tell them anything, what is the most simple series of information that you don't want them to go through your entire medical history?
Right.
It's garbage and it doesn't mean anything. You want to get right to, this is what's super important: allergies, height, weight, major diagnoses, medications, all those. If there's an advanced healthcare directive, if they want CPR, all those things. You just want to have all that laid out so that they can, because what if you go to the ER? It's like you could have the best team of doctors and nurses and surgeons in the world. They don't know you. They don't know if this is normal, abnormal, if this is your base. If you don't know the president today, they don't know that you didn't know it 10 years ago. Like,
right, exactly.
So
Yes.
it's like you have to kind of be your own advocate or be that person for someone. So I think if you can just kind of try to keep that stuff as current as possible, and maybe it's a Google sheet, maybe it's maybe you have a HIPAA compliant thing in the cloud, affordable solution, but just trying to keep on top of that, because you can go through your medical records and there's mistakes. I promise.
Absolutely.
There's mistakes everywhere. Like, we're human, and there's computers and typing. And so it's like, you kind of have to just stay on top of that stuff, because nobody's going to know better than you.
Mm-mm.
And I think patients and family members need to have some confidence in that too. I know it can be really hard to talk sometimes to doctors and nurses, and they speak another language, but it's like, nobody knows you better than you.
Totally agree. I would call it my, in case you get hit by a bus file, because, we're caregivers.
Yeah.
God forbid something happened to you. How are they going to know? And I would keep a list of all of my mother's medications. And when they changed, I would get rid of that one and print a new one and put it where I used to pin it above her meds, and keep that running list of, even down to like television channels and shows that she liked.
Yeah.
But I would print all of that out. And she had a vasovagal syndrome where she would pass out when she got hot or pain or whatever. So I kept a copy of her latest EKG in the folder, so that when the paramedics came, because by the time she woke up, she never wanted to go to the hospital, I could say, here's her last EKG, so they could compare it and see.
Yeah.
To try to avoid that. But it's those types of things. They're little things, but they can help in big ways.
Yeah.
And it's important. And then it's not so overwhelming, so that you have all of that. And then when you do get a chance to leave your house, to have a little respite, or just to get out for an hour, that is there for them.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. That's brilliant. And I would even say for people that have pacemakers and people that have, if they have to get their labs drawn a lot, have your most recent lab results, not your entire medical history.
Not everything.
That's crazy. But the important things, have those there and accessible. And it makes the caregiver rest assured they can walk out of the house and maybe silence their phone for a little bit. And
Right. Because you've covered it all. And part of that anxiety also is, oh, I forgot.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't tell them. Oh, I did. And this way, when you do that, when you're writing it down and you're keeping a log, and it's a pain to do all that initially, but then it's done.
Yeah. I found, even, you were saying like, the old meds, I found even including why we stopped taking a certain med.
Yes.
But having that somewhere, like, oh, we don't take Lasix because she gets up all night and she'll fall, and these, like, you just need to know those things. And allergies, like, you just need to know why someone can't have morphine, or why someone should, like, all these things. It's like, we know this information, but we need to put it all together. And I have this form that I got from somewhere. It's called the Vial of Life.
Oh,
I share it with everybody. I can share it with you too.
But I'd love to see it.
It's just this front and back little thing that I know they used to put on the refrigerator. Yeah. So maybe it was like a paramedic or somebody had created this thing. It's called the Vial of Life. And I was like, oh, this is a great start. And then I kind of customized it, made it my own. I was like, oh, well, I also need this. And like, if they have severe Alzheimer's, that needs to be up at the top.
Yes.
Because you're going to ask them who's president and they're not going to know. And like, you need to have these people on there. You need to have like the primary care who, what's their blood type, what's their major allergies, all those things. And it's like, if you could just have this front and back and a list of meds, like, my goodness, that is huge. Someone walks into, an ER and they have that, and like the doctors and nurses and everyone triaging them is like, oh, thank you. Because otherwise they're going to run every test in the world, screen for everything, make sure they're not missing something. At least if they've got some sort of like, oh, she's got a history of strokes or she's on blood thinners. Oh, okay, good to know. Like this is super important.
Right. No, absolutely. You know, with all of this, how do you, again, back to like providing the care in the house, how do you access what's needed, equipment wise, we'll say, through the doctor, through, you know, things that you've noticed or, you know, anything when the doctors, do you have a house call doctor? Can you have a nurse that comes or a mobile phlebotomist or radiology, like all of that? How do you set all that up?
I would say, again, the most important relationship of your care team is that primary care doctor. And if you can have a mobile physician be a part of that group, mobile phlebotomy, mobile almost anything these days, you want that because let's face it, if you have a chronic disease or you have mobility issues or cognitive impairment, you don't want to have to take that person across town to see the doctor. Like you're going to cause more harm than you are good if you're doing that all the time. So if I always say if you don't need to be in the ER, the OR, or the ICU, you could probably get it at home or close to home, pretty close. And so I think just trying to connect those things and what's covered by your insurance or Medicare or whatever, obviously you go there first and you utilize that. But I found there's ways to fill in the gaps. You know, like you get to a point where you know, like, oh, that's not going to be covered. So here's our options. We can do this, this, or this. But it's just so important to have those options. You know, the difference from paying for like a private ambulance or having like a membership to like, you know, if you know someone always needs transportation to a doctor's appointment, you're going to plan for that in advance. And you can save yourself so much time and so much money. You know, just having these systems in place, and maybe you'll never need that, but it's good to have that information in case you do, you
Right.
know?
No, absolutely. And because you can call the insurance company and see, do you have a house call doctor? Do you
Yeah.
have this? And that's really the key. That's
Yeah.
the unlock code for that, is because then they'll have the mobile phlebotomist and the mobile radiologist and all of that.
Yeah.
And it removes so much angst, so much angst.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times, you know, I say if you've got a geriatrics patient, you should be seeing a geriatrician because they really understand things metabolize differently in someone who's a teeny tiny older woman. And they also know what's usually available in that community. Like, oh, here's where people go for this. Here's what they do for that. And they're able to, if a nurse or an assistant is calling from a doctor's office, someone's going to listen to them more than they're going to listen to a daughter or someone who's like doesn't even know what language of medicine they're talking about. They're going to listen to that assistant or nurse and be like, yep, they're calling from Dr. So-and-so's office. We're going to take care of them.
Right.
So sometimes it's kind of sad that depends on who's talking to who, but you want to find someone in your doctor's office, whether it's a nurse or the assistant, the gatekeeper.
Yep.
You want to make friends with that person and you want them to, you know, you don't want to burden them, but you want to ask them, what can I do? I'm trying to be a good, you know, steward. I'm trying to be a good advocate to this other person. Like, what are the things that I can do to help? And because it takes a village.
It does take a village. And I call them the magic words, the words that you say that they know that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you have to have that language.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the best way to find that language. If you don't know it,
Yeah.
the best way to find that language is through, what would you say?
I mean, I think it depends on what disease process you're dealing with, what age group, what chronic conditions, because they're all going to have their own sort of thing.
Vernacular.
Yeah, they all have their own thing. And so I think, you know, even just going to doctor's appointments, I think that's such a huge lift I think if you can have someone go with you, no matter who you are, how old you are, have someone go with you who's going to take notes and just be there observing and taking notes, because telling you, you're going to miss so much information that they wrote down that you didn't catch. And you really just have to get used to that language. And if you're not going to these appointments, it's very hard to keep up and know. If you think about it, these doctors, a lot of them are not in the same systems.
Yep.
And they don't have the same charting. And so they don't know that you just went to the pulmonologist last week and had XYZ done. They don't know that they don't know things that they're not privy to. And so you really have to, I think, keep really good notes. I always have a notebook with me, and whoever's with me, I'm like,
Same.
you write down the date, what doctor we're at, what we're here for, what tests they did, what we need to follow up on, because so much of it is the follow up. They ordered these things and they ordered that and this, and it's just like, well, whose job is it to make sure all those things get done? And who's going to find out what those results are? And who's going to find out what those results mean? And it's like, you have to really be on top of it, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It is. And how do you get your parent to accept, I'm going to go with you?
Yeah, I know that too. It's tough because I definitely find that my parents don't want me going to doctor's appointments with them. Maybe they do. I don't know. I doubt it, but
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, maybe they do because I'm a nurse. Well, here's the other thing that I'm thinking is like, people don't want to admit that they need help when they need it, because then they think they're going to lose all their autonomy. They're going to lose their rights. They're going to lose, the moment you admit that like you're not okay and you can't drive and you can't do these things, like, they're going to take everything away from me. And that's not the case. And I think if you can have conversations with people in your life and say, look, I'm here for you. I'm your ride or die. I am here to the end, and I'm going to make sure you get all the things that you need. But we have to talk openly and honestly. If you're having a problem, if something's changing, like, let's get to the bottom of it quickly. And, you really have to have people that are on your side and that know you. And I think you collect these people, whether it's a professional or it's a daughter or it's a grandson, or there are these people that are like, what, I'm willing to help if you will let me. And so I think you just, with an older parent or something, it's like, hey, I want you to stay at home. Nobody's arguing with you. Let's make some compromises. Let's do a couple of things that we have to do to make sure you can stay here for as long as possible and be safe and healthy and get all the things, and so that everyone else is not worried about you, because everyone else wants to maybe move you out because they want to have eyes on you and make sure you're okay. Well, let's compromise and do some things that can make sure that everyone's okay and feeling safe with where you are, what's going on there.
I love that. We're all on the same team.
We are.
Again, all the way back, we're all on the same team. We all want the same thing. And it's important. It's important to make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always interesting to me because you have a personal, your personal experience with your grandfather at a young age almost kind of set your tone for what you wanted to do. And I find that, the more and more people that I talk to that are in this type of industry that wants to do something come from that. And was that the basis for your work? Not all of your work, obviously, but for Call Light or for what you're doing now?
When I was in high school, I think I told my family, I said, well, I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to cure Alzheimer's and I'm going to do all these things. And, I had that in my head. I'm really going to do something. And I tried to avoid that. I think, I went into entertainment. I went into radio, TV, film. I moved out to Hollywood. I worked at Nickelodeon. I did all these things. But it kept pulling me and pulling me. And eventually I ended up going back to school. I became a nurse. And then as a nurse, I saw all these gaps in our care system. And I'm like, well, I'll start a non-medical home care agency. Oh, well, I'll be the nurse care manager that's taking care of people. And I'll be the patient quarterback. And then I'll start helping people hire nurses. And it's like, I tell my parents this, like, if I don't create the systems and the tools to care for my parents, who's going to care for us? Who's going to care for our loved ones? Like, I saw my parents struggle and the things that they went through. And I just remember thinking, this has got to be easier. Like, this should not be this hard. And as a healthcare professional, I came late to the game. I became a nurse when I was about 30. But maybe my life experience helped me get there a little faster. I knew what it was like for family members. I knew there were all these gaps in care. And I just wanted to help people bridge those gaps much faster. Like, I know what's probably ahead. I've seen this before. What would you do differently if you knew back then what you know today? Think of the things you would have done differently. And it's like, oh my goodness, there's so much more we could have done. We just didn't even know.
Yes.
It chooses you. It chooses you. You don't choose this. It chooses you.
It does choose you. You're right. You're absolutely right. Because I mean, you could go in the other direction and you just keep coming back. Well, tell me about Call Light. Tell me what you do with this.
I kind of came up with this idea almost 7 years ago. I have a little boy who's almost 7. So when he was a baby, I was hiring, his first part-time nanny, those types of things. And I found these great sitters through other moms, other groups, all these things. And I said, well, I have to check your references. You could be great on paper, but I don't know
Right.
I don't know much about you. We got to check this out. And so I remember one of these gals that I found said, oh, can I show you my review page from this babysitting site? And I was like, what is this? Is this like Yelp? Is this even legit? Like, I don't know if these are your friends giving you reviews or what. So I check out these reviews. It was actually Urban Sitter, which I'm a fan of. I'm a member of. Great for finding a sitter. They had real ratings and reviews of these babysitters. And I was like, oh my goodness, they're tracking data of like repeat customers. If someone is always on time, all these things that you're like, oh my gosh. And I remember thinking this would be a game changer for me in my private duty nursing registry, where we could be rating and, these nurses that are really fantastic and wonderful are going to get all these great reviews and, they're going to be able to have like higher, jobs and they're going to be able to get higher wages. So I just thought, oh my gosh, if someone would do this would be really fantastic. But I had a newborn. So I was like, well, someone else will do that. But then all these years later, I honestly feel at this point, I don't know who could do it better and who would do it in a way that's not going to take advantage of nurses, take advantage of patients. A lot of people come into this because they're like, oh, there's a lot of money in it. And I'm like, no, actually with Call Light, what I'm trying to do is get rid of the middleman. Right. And, I did a private duty nurse registry, but it was only accessible to very wealthy people. And it was really heartbreaking to see how many people we were not able to help. And I just kept thinking like, we shouldn't have to charge so much. I want the nurses to make more money, but I want the patients to pay less. How can we do this? And so with Call Light, my dream was to create a safe platform where these nurses and clinicians can go on there and families can safely connect and look at them and say, oh, they don't live very far from me. I'm looking for this. So in this way, we're getting rid of that 30 to 50% overhead that happens with registries and agencies, but it's also not Craigslist. Right. Like we're vetting these people. We're checking their license. They all have malpractice liability insurance. They all have professional references, and there's an accountability thing. The ratings and reviews, that keeps a lot of people honest.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to create something that was accessible so that there could be more impact and more help for more people, because let's face it, there's about 4 million nurses in the United States. There's probably one not very far from your loved one who would love to help, but just doesn't have this system set up yet.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And you're just in California right now? Or you spreading?
We're spreading. It's funny. I thought we were going to start in California because that's where all my nurses are. That's where all my contacts are. But I'll tell you what happened, because this is real life. We had a former patient moving from California to Tennessee. And they reached out and said, oh gosh, we heard you're doing Call Light. We're so excited. Please tell us you're doing it in Tennessee. And I was like, oh gosh, no, we're just getting the tech going. Like, this is a lot of work. But I just knew this. And I asked them, how's it going, your search? And they said, it's not going well. We haven't had a lot of luck. And I said, well, how much time do you have? When are you guys planning to move? And they said, well, we planned on moving like 2 years ago. Just life got in the way. And they said, we probably have about 2 months. And I was like, well, shoot, 2 months. I'm not used to having that much time to put together a team. That sounds like forever. And so I just took a leap of faith and I said, you know what? If I can do this in Franklin, Tennessee, Thompson Station, never even heard of it. Apparently it's really a lovely area. If I can do this here, I can do this anywhere. And so for whatever reason, we ended up starting there because that's where people needed us. So I've found that people are calling us in West Palm Beach. People are calling us in Phoenix. People are now calling us in SoCal. So it just kind of depends. And I feel like as long as we have nurses available, clinicians available, in those areas and people need it, it doesn't take very long to kind of get to that critical mass of we've got enough people to take care of them now.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great, because it's so helpful, because it is in those moments when you're like, okay, I think I can do this, but I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if I should do this.
Yeah.
I don't know, those moments when you're called to clean out a wound or do a catheter. Okay, let me do a catheter. What? Like, okay, we're going to take a deep breath and we're going to figure this out. But in those moments, it'd be great to be able to say, I have a nurse coming.
Yeah. And we've had those cases where we had, the very wealthy CEO of some company who had surgery and then wasn't urinating afterwards. And that's a problem if you get to 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours,
Sure
like
it
you
is.
could die. And so, he had a concierge doctor and was able to just call and say, you know what, we're going to send a nurse. And we sent a nurse and they paid several $100s. That guy's like, that's the best several $100s I ever spent. I didn't have to go anywhere. Someone came to my home. And it's like, why can't we make that more accessible for more people?
Well, accessible and affordable.
Yes.
And that's
what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And that's beautiful. I love that. So it's Call Light, and I love the name Call Light. So that's great. So you're expanding, you're hoping to expand.
Yeah,
further.
we're expanding. And I found that I get calls from other patient advocates, other nurses who are kind of building their teams. And they're like, oh my gosh, this tool makes it so much easier. So a lot of it is just getting the word out there, telling people this is available. It makes it so much easier for these nurses to accept a job, to invoice, they get paid directly. Because I found a lot of people, if they're trying to do this on their own, even nurses, sometimes they don't get paid. Sometimes things don't. And so to have an accountability thing is really important for both sides, like some safe, healthy boundaries. And also just people don't know what they don't know. So it's like, we're trying to make it more accessible, affordable, efficient, and, be able to help more people because it's needed. The time is beyond needed now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. We are well beyond it. Yes. Well, do you have any final thoughts or any final words for a family caregiver?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. I can't tell you how many times I do some pro bono work. And now I'm going to start getting calls, right? But I would get, someone would say, I have a friend or a loved one or something, and I can't tell you how many 20 or 30-minute conversations I've just given away. I'm never going to charge somebody for that. But like, there are other people like me, other nurses, other doctors, other advocates who will do that 20 or 30-minute just to get you on the right path and to just say, hey, if I were you, this is what I would do. And they can at least just get you started. And I often tell people, even if they can't afford my services, I say, I'm not going to leave you stranded. So here's who I'm going to refer you to. You let me know if that doesn't work out for some reason, reach back out to me because I've got other, things. So I think just asking for help and not being afraid to ask for help. Sometimes you're going to pay a little bit, but I think it's worth it to have somebody who is going to be honest with you and who can cut through all that stuff and help you navigate. It's going to save you in the long run so much time and grief and probably money.
To learn more about Courtney and Call Light, visit call-light.com. I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Head over to daughterhood.org and click on the podcast section for show notes, including the full transcript and links to any resources and information from today's episode. You can find and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Daughterhood the Podcast. Feel free to leave me a message and let me know what issues you may be facing and would like to hear more about. Or even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Also, a very special thank you to Susan Rowe for our theme music, the instrumental version of her beautiful song Mama's Eyes from her album Lessons in Love. I hope you found what you were looking for today. Information, inspiration, or even just a little company. This is Roseanne Corcoran. I hope you'll join me next time in Daughterhood.